Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome friends to this 8th lecture in this course Political Parties and Party System in India. Today we are going to discuss a new party, Bharatiya Janata Party, and we will have 2 lectures on this. In this lecture today as part 1 related to Bharatiya Janata Party, we are going to focus on its history and ideology starting from the formation of Bharatiya Janata Party in 1980s to its near hegemonic or clear dominating position in contemporary politics in India, and we will also discuss the ideology and the leadership of BJP and its connection with Bharatiya Jana Sangh and Rashtriya Swayansevak Sangh. So, BJP as a party in Indian politics has a unique position in many ways, and one of such unique position is its affiliation or its closeness with institution like RSS and its affiliates. So, many of the policy and programs and also the leadership, if you look at or study, you will find hardly much different between the policies, programs, philosophy of these institutions and the BJP. So, this is what make BJP a unique party in Indian politics. It is unique in also in a sense where the BJP has experienced no split so far, where you see factionalism, rivalries, split, defection in many other parties. Such occurrence is very less, or there has been no split at all since its inception in 1980s. So, BJP remains in that sense a unique party. It is also unique in a sense that when it has seen its different phases, where it won just 2 seats in the parliament, also a situation where no parties were willing to align with the BJP because of its core majoritarian agenda, and even when many parties, regional parties align with the BJP, they withdraw from the alliance precisely because of their fear of losing their support base. So, from that kind of situation now, where BJP has truly become a systemic party in a sense, the whole political discourse and political alignment and realignment are now in contemporary politics in India is often in response to the policies, programs and activities of the BJP. So, in that sense BJP in Indian politics remain a very unique political parties. If we look at its formation, the BJP now occupies the position of dominance in Indian politics that we have discussed, and it has consecutively formed government at the center in 2014 and 2019. That is something unique in a sense that BJP has won these election by obtaining the majority on its own. So, from the coalition era politics, where it was seen that no single party will form the government on its own, now BJP has obtained a status where on its own it is obtaining the majority in the parliament, and it can form the government on its own. However, the government that is there in center in 2004 was there in 2014 and also in 2019 is the coalition government. In a sense, there are many other alliance partner in the government formation. And besides winning twice at the national level, BJP also directly or through its alliance with the regional party controls the government in 18 states in India. And in the current Lok Sabha seat, it has 303 members and 80 members in the Rajya Sabha. So, this clearly establishes BJP as a dominating party in Indian politics, both at the regional level or at the national level. The steady rise of BJP is based on the twin principle of Hindu nationalism and developmentalism or new developmentalism. So, when there was the growth for garnering support among the particular or the specific caste or groups in the society, BJP has occupied a position when which was occupied earlier by the Congress. And in recent decades, BJP has expanded from its Hindi heartland core support base to many other parts of India, particularly in the northeast and also in the south. This expansion in terms of geography also coincide with the traditional support base of the BJP, which was regarded as a Baniya party or upper caste party. So, from that kind of core support base to now, BJP has attained a status where it has mass support also among the OBCs, Dalits and also Muslims. Now, this kind of geographical expansion of the BJP along with its social expansion in a sense of representing different castes or different segments of Indian society, BJP has achieved that by reinventing itself to address newer challenges or new realities in Indian politics, however remaining very rigid or very committed to its core ideology of Hindu nationalism and also new developmentalism. This twin combination of Hindu nationalism and developmentalism has enabled the BJP to expand geographically and also in terms of its social support base. And this expansion of BJP has decisively shifted the center of Indian politics away from Congress and other opposition regional party. So, very long time, as we have discussed in a lecture on party system, Congress party used to provide that center in Indian competitive party politics for 2 decades after the independence. And since the formation of Janata Party government, although Congress had some kind of dominating position at the national level and many regional level, the state parties began to play a dominating role. And also in the national at the national level, from 1989 till 1908 or 99, the Janata Party formations after the collapse of Janata Party in 1980s and the rise of its various splintering groups in different states, they also played a very significant role in the national politics, and at times there was debates about the third front or alternative to non-Congress or non-BJP formation. So, from that kind of a political scenario, now with the rise and growth of BJP, the center of politics has shifted away both from the national Congress party and also many regional parties, and BJP has now occupied that position of center in Indian political discourse. BJP therefore has now a kind of hegemonic presence in Indian politics, and such rise of BJP is result of its disciplined and effective organization. Now, this disciplined and effective organization of the BJP is something that we have to understand the rise and growth of the BJP. So, it is only party in Indian politics where the organization and the ideology of the party comes prior to individual, and therefore, the individual ambition that leads to rivalries or factionalism in other party is non-existent perhaps, except during some period. More or less BJP has maintained a kind of disciplined among its cadres and also among the leaders, where the organization and the ideology of party comes prior to the individual ambition. And therefore, in comparison to other political party, you do not see a split, a large scale defection from the BJP. And its effective organization in a sense that among the people, not just in the for a very long time, its support base came mainly from the Hindi heartland, but now in many other parts of India, BJP has successfully expanded its organizational base, and that disciplined party workers and effective organization is also supported by RSS and many of its affiliates like Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh or ABVP or VHP and many other affiliation of the RSS. This is also further strengthened by the charismatic leadership of the current leaders in the BJP, Prime Minister Modi and Shah, and their financial resources to run an efficient and effective election campaign. So, together with this disciplined and effective organization supported by RSS and its affiliates, along with the charismatic leadership and financial resources, makes BJP a dominating or a kind of hegemonic force in Indian politics, which has won election after election both at the national and at the central at the state level. The formation of BJP was on April 8, 1980. Bharatiya Janata Party was formed, and most of the members of the BJP were formerly Jan Sangh members, which was part of Janata Party coalition along with some other parties. And after the collapse of Janata Party, these members came together to form a new party, Bharatiya Janata Party. And after the formation of BJP, they claim to inherit the legacy of Janata Party ideology, and that is a kind of tactical or a strategical shift in the party ideology and strategy to open itself for larger alliance, to show its liberal face rather than the narrow or cleavages based party outlook that was there associated with Bharatiya Jana Sangh. So, as we have discussed in the previous lecture, that the Bharatiya Jana Sangh represented the ideology and the politics of RSS, but it was never in a never seen among the political parties as the mainstream party. So, it remained a kind of marginal force unless it until it aligned with Janata Party coalition, where for the first time it won substantial number of seats. So, after the formation of this new party BJP, the leaders of the BJP consciously asserted their inheritance of the legacy of JP movement or Janata Party. Therefore, it strived towards distancing itself both from RSS and also Bharatiya Jana Sangh. And this phase of BJP is therefore very interesting to see how BJP constantly revises its strategy to forge alliances even when it was a kind of isolated force, no party, national or regional, willing to align with the BJP. From that kind of situation to emerging as a dominant or hegemonic party, to understand that one needs to understand these policies and shift or revision in a strategy in the BJP of 1980s and 90s. So, it strived towards distancing itself from both Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS in order to project its liberal outlook and to forge alliance with other parties to provide viable alternative to the Congress. So, Congress there was a kind of common outlook among many other opposition parties in 1980s and 90s because of the corruption or the appeasement policy that was associated with the Congress party, and to provide the viable alternative to the Congress, there was many kind of formulation and reformulation among different political parties. And to align with that kind of formation, BJP had to assert its liberal broader outlook, and to do that it has to distance itself with the ideology or the legacy of Bharatiya Janasangh and Rashtriya Swayansemak Sangh. And in that spirit of distancing from Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS, it included many leaders who had previously no relationship or no association with the movement of Hindu nationalism. So, the RSS and Bharatiya Janasangh, when we will discuss its linkages with the BJP in the later section of this lecture today, was movement for creation of Hindu nationalism in India, or they define India as a Hindu nation. Many leaders that was included in the party after its formation in 1980s had no previous association with the movement for Hindu nationalism. For example, Ram Jethmalani, a noted lawyer in Bombay, Shanti Bhushan, who was the Minister of Justice in Janata government, and Sikandar Bakht was a member of Congress organization, and Congress organization party was part of coalition group in Janata party. So, these three leaders prominently among many others were included in the BJP and also given a prominent role in the party organization. So, this clearly establishes BJP's ability to reinvent, to tactically shift its strategy in terms of responding to the changing realities in the politics. And again it gone back to the ideology and the philosophy of Janasangh and RSS, which it represent in contemporary times also. However, after its inception, it tries to assert its inheritance of Janata party or JP movement by distancing itself with the narrow or the marginal force seen among the mainstream political parties in India, like the Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS. This leads to some kind of tension between the RSS and its affiliates and the BJP also, which characterize the relationship between NDA led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee and the RSS and its affiliates, which we will discuss in the later section. However, in the immediate aftermath of its formation, BJP stresses upon the Janata part or the inheritance of the ideology and philosophy of Janata more than it focused on its relationship with Bharatiya Janasangh and the RSS. However, later in mid 1980s, a shift was seen when BJP started tilting towards the ideology and organizational strategy of Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS. So, BJP, as I said, is a unique party also in a sense that the organizational structure of the BJP is very different from other political parties. So, when this shift in the strategy did not work in terms of electoral performance, BJP reverted back to associating itself with the ideology and the organizational strategies of the Bharatiya Janasangh and the RSS to provide viable alternative to the Congress. In 2014, the BJP won the general election with a thumping victory, defeating the Congress-led UPA, which ruled for previous 2 terms at the center. So, after the first term of the BJP, when there was the popular perception that he will come back to power with India signing debate and so on. However, BJP was defeated by Congress-led UPA, and they formed again formed government again in 2009. So, BJP come to power after defeating the UPA rule of 10 years in 2010, and political analysts argue that charismatic leadership of Narendra Modi and decline of Congress party had led to BJP's victory at the center a decade after the Vajpayee government. Presently in 2019, the BJP again remain victorious and also in many states. So, now if we look at the ideology of Congress BJP, we find it a party which is seen as the right wing party and largely inspired by the ideology of Hindu nationalism and Hindutva. So, that remains the core ideology of or philosophy of BJP, and they have of course defined it not in a narrow sense, where constantly you find many leaders and the ideologue of leaders of BJP and the ideologues of RSS defining nationalism to include all those who inhabit this land or share the cultural ethos and practices of majority communities of India. So, there are difference in terms of interpretation of what is Hindu nationalism or what is Hindutva among the leaders or ideologues of RSS, and their critique both in the left and also among the Congress and other opposition parties. So, there will be a difference of interpretation about what this Hindu nationalism is or what does Hindutva mean, where it is seen as a narrow ideology which represent a particular community. However, the leaders of the BJP or the RSS trying to expand or include many other communities within their interpretation or understanding of Hindutva and Hindu nationalism. However, what is sure is the fact that the Hindu nationalism or the ideology of Hindutva is something that is at the core or the core philosophy or influence on the policies, programs of Bharatiya Janata Party. Party is also deeply influenced by the philosophy of Deen Dayal Upadhyay's integral humanism and Savarkar theory of Hindutva. Integral humanism of Deen Dayal Upadhyay believes that a man is constitutive of body, mind, soul and intellect, and this combination of body, mind, soul and intellect, according to Upadhyay, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, defines the completeness of man or integral man. Moreover, he argued that a good social setup or an ideal society should satisfy individuals' spiritual and material needs. So, instead of looking at the conflicts or difference, in this philosophy of integral humanism, the individual and the social, different groups within the social and the national, there has not there is no kind of conflict or difference in their understanding of individual to social to the national. And in fact, in that kind of understanding, the role of individual, social and national is seen superior to that of the state and the politics, which is seen as a kind of temporary material struggle or competition, whereas the individual, social and the national is seen something as the larger, superior to the temporal politics of state and government. So, it talks about from the integral individual or the integration of body, mind, soul and intellect to make the man or the individual a complete entity, to constituting a good society or a good social setup, where it should satisfy both the material and the spiritual needs of that individual. It defines nationalism as an organic entity or in organic sense, and argue that it should be a deciding factor in the national politics or nation's politics. And therefore, in the BJP and its ideology, the idea of nation or nationalism or national integration always comes first than the politics or competitive struggle for power. So, this comes from this idea of integral humanism, as I have said, where individual is seen as a constitutive of different elements, and there is no conflict in those elements. It has to be seen as a kind of continuum from the body, mind, soul and intellect as a complete individual entity to the social and the national, and these continuum should be the guiding force for the politics, and therefore, the idea and ideology of nationalism is seen as a superior force, superior idea in comparison to the politics of state and the government or the party competition for power. It thus regards society and nation superior to the state and politics, and therefore, the superior entity of the idea of nation, social should guide the politics of state and the parties. The party is also influenced by Deen Dayal branch of the third way, and the third way in Deen Dayal writings and speeches is to avoid the binary of capitalism and communism that is provided by the modern West. He was talking about this integral humanism, which is a kind of avoiding the binary of both the communism and the capitalism of the modern West. However, if we look at the policies and programs of the BJP, it has been seen as committed to bring economic development by embracing capitalism, liberalization, privatization and globalization. So, in terms of economic philosophy, it has shifted from its belief in the ideology of Swadeshi to adopting modern capitalist industrial mode of development by embracing the philosophy of liberalization, privatization and globalization. And in terms of economic policy, there is not really much different between Congress and the BJP. However, when it comes to understand India as a nation or defining of Indian nationhood, there is a sharp distinction between these two parties. The party also claimed to be inspired by the Gandhian socialism and his philosophy of Sarvodaya. The idea of Gandhian socialism was something that was inserted or included in the policies or philosophy or what is called key commitments of the BJP in 1980s. Of course, there has been many internal criticism to this idea of Gandhian socialism, where many leaders within the party felt that the ideology or the philosophy of integral humanism as argued by Deendayal Upadhyay includes the aspect that one can think of exist there in Gandhian philosophy of socialism or Gandhian socialism. However, it is included in the party's commitment. So, there is also this approach then to broaden the outlook, and it would be mistake to understand that the BJP remains the party which was similar or remain a kind of constant force in politics. It constantly changes its strategy, its tactics, or broaden its outlook to include or to respond to the newer challenges or the newer realities in India. However, the core philosophy or the ideology of the BJP remains same. Of course, one also need to understand these shifts and broadening of outlook and how BJP now manages to get the support of different segments, different strata of Indian society. So, the philosophy or the ideology of BJP is also inspired by Gandhian socialism, and the core ideology and philosophy of BJP could be found in this following 5 commitments of the party that is mentioned in its constitution and law. The first and topmost among them is nationalism and national integration. And as I have discussed just now, nation and nationalism has a very different understanding or connotation in the ideology and philosophy of the BJP and among the ideologues of the RSS, where it is seen as the superior force in the organic sense, not in a material or temporal sense. So, the core of the BJP philosophy and ideology is the ideology of nationalism and national integration. Then comes Gandhian socialism, which is about Gandhian idea of Sarvodaya or Antyodaya and commitment to uplifting or emancipating the poor through the welfare programs and the policies. So, many of the policies and programs of the BJP like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan or Ujjwala scheme or many such schemes are also inspired by this Gandhian idea of socialism or Gandhian socialism. It is also committed to democracy and positive secularism, which BJP defines as Sarva Dharma Sambhav. And this idea of positive secularism is very different from say Congress practice of secularism, and one needs to make a distinction between this philosophy or understanding or theory of secularism on the one hand and its practices. So, secularism as a theory or as a philosophy argues about the state or the government which should not be guided by the religion, and there should not be religion should not be used while taking state or government's decision. So, there is a kind of separate domain for the religion and politics. It is not disrespect to each other's domain, but largely non-interference into each other's domain. So, that was the guiding principle or philosophy for Indian Republic after the independence. So, unlike Pakistan, which declared itself as theocratic state or the Islamic state, India is a secular state because state do not subscribe to any particular religion. It provides freedom to all religion, protects the minorities, but state itself do not profess or propagate any particular form of religion. So, from that kind of philosophy or understanding of secularism in 1980s, as I have discussed in a lecture on Congress, how its practices was about appeasing different communities. So, by opening the gates of Babri Masjid or reversing the Supreme Court decision in Shah Banu case, led the BJP to criticize, and many scholars and intellectuals also to question this appeasement policy. So, the secularism was reduced to appeasing different communities for the vote banks, and thereby it emboldened the BJP to question this negative secularism as it was practiced by Congress party in 80s and also 90s. BJP stood for, and that remains the philosophy of BJP, that is for Sarva Dharma Samabhav, that is equal respect for all religion, which it calls as positive secularism. Then it is also about value based politics. So, it wants to bring about a kind of politics where the value and norms should guide political actions and political behavior. So, if you remember the politicians and constant defection or split and merger, corruption, that characterized politics and define it in a very negative ways. BJP talks about a politics which is value based politics, where political action is seen as something higher, higher norms, or a profession to serve the society as a kind of ideal, rather than acquiring power for the sake of acquire. So, in its competition for acquiring power or forming government, the motivation or the inspiration comes from this higher notions or higher ideals of, say, creating a strong nation, or empowering all the sections of the society by following Gandhian notion of socialism, subscribing to the democratic politics rather than undemocratic or authoritarian kind of tendencies, or misusing the power and so on. So, in terms of ideology and philosophy, the BJP is guided by these five commitments to the nation, to the people, and that remains the guiding force for all its policies and programs. Among these five commitments, the integral humanism, as argued by Deen Dayal Upadhyay, remains the basic philosophy of the party. So, very often you also hear among the leaders of the BJP about the Savarkar ideas of Hindutva, and there is also conflation with or a kind of confusion with this idea of Hindutva to Hindu nationalism, and defining India in the Indian nationalism in a sense of Hindu nationalism or Hindutva. The core of BJP philosophy is derived from the integral humanism of Deen Dayal Upadhyay, that talks about individual, social and national in a continuum that seeks to establish harmony or unity or integrity rather than difference and conflict. So, that remains the guiding philosophy of the policies and programs of the party. And if you look at the slogans of BJP in 2014 election, about Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas was in a way reflective of this vision of Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Now, if we move on to discuss the leadership of the BJP, we find that the leadership of the BJP largely come from or dominated by the RSS and its affiliates. So, many organizational secretaries or Sangathan Mantris of earlier Bharatiya Jan Sangh or of the RSS organization, they directly influence or participate in the organizational expansion of the BJP. So, most of its leadership comes largely from the RSS and also dominated by them, and since the Bharatiya Jan Sangh days, there has been a number of prominent leaders who consolidated the party's support base. So, Syama Prasad Mukherjee and Deen Dayal Upadhyay shaped the ideology and also the organizational structure for the BJP to follow. So, except for a brief period after its formation, when it focused more on the Janata Party and the legacy of Janata Party, in mid 1980s it reverted back to Jan Sangh or RSS in terms of ideology and also organization structure or expansion of the structure. So, these coherence both in terms of ideology and organization was first shaped by the leaders of Jan Sangh like Syama Prasad Mukherjee and Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Lal Krishna Advani, among many other leaders, led the party during the coalition era of pre-poll alliance or post-poll alliance, and through the combined strategy of moderate and the militant Hinduism. So, this period also characterized BJP as the combination of these two phases, which often in political discourse regarded as soft Hindutva or hard Hindutva. So, this combination of moderate and militant Hindutva or Hinduism worked for the party on the one hand to remain committed to its core philosophy and core ideology, and on the other hand to forge alliance with the other regional and also national parties. So, this combination of moderate and militant Hinduism and Hindutva represented largely by L.K. Advani and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, where Vajpayee is seen as more liberal and the moderate phase, and Advani is seen as a more hardliner or a representative of militant notion of Hinduism and Hindutva with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and the polarization of or mobilization of the masses on the issue of Ayodhya and so on. So, those combined strategies of militant and moderate was to expand the support base of the BJP. However, there was no sharp difference as such that existed between these two leaders, Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Lal Krishna Advani, because both of them were from the same background of Bharatiya Jan Sangh days and were together in the political formation of the BJP, and prior to that also in different capacities as the president or the secretary in the Bharatiya Jan Sangh. However, in this phase of 1980s to tend to represent these two phases of the BJP, which enabled the party to be the largest single largest party in the parliament, and since then it continues to have the largest number of seats except when UP was in power. So, BJP also formed the first coalition government under the leadership at the center in 1989. So, the Vajpayee and Lal Krishna Advani also led the party to form the first full time BJP led government at the center in 1998. However, the Vajpayee government lost support of its allies, and that shows how BJP as a party was isolated by many other regional or national parties, when nobody was no party was willing to align with the party. And after 13 months, Vajpayee government failed because of they lost the vote of confidence in the Lok Sabha. Again in 1909, BJP came back to power with its coalition partner, and BJP won 182 out of 294 seats it contested, and was 182 seats, and Vajpayee became the PM. However, the NDA coalition lost to the Congress led UPA in 2004, as we have discussed before. So, in 2014, the BJP led NDA formed government at the center, defeating the Congress led UPA. It is argued that BJP rose to power due to the charisma or charismatic leadership of Narendra Modi. It won 282 seats, a clear majority, and its NDA allies contributed another 54 seats to form a comfortable majority government at the center. The victory of BJP in Assam State Assembly election in 2016 and formation of BJP led government there was its first victory in Northeast region, which soon followed by the establishment of BJP led or coalition government in other states of the Northeast like Tripura, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Nagaland, Meghalaya and Sikkim. Thus, the BJP under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi and Amit Shah has usured in a new era of party system in India, and party has shunned its Hindi heartland and Brahmin Baniya party tag, and now it truly represents, as once upon a time Congress did, the cross sections of Indian electorates in its and its organizational strength and geographical reach are formidable in contemporary Indian politics. So to say that the BJP as a party now no longer is confined only to the Hindi heartland or merely representing the upper caste Brahmins and Baniya, but it also expanded beyond Hindi heartland to northeast, to south, and in terms of social strata it also represents the interest groups or communities like OBC, Dalits and also Muslims. Now, if we look at the links of Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS, although as a party BJP is formed in 1980, yet it can be argued that the social base of the party is composed of members who supported Bharatiya Janasangh and the RSS, and the ideology or the core philosophy of BJP comes from these two organizations, Bharatiya Janasangh and the RSS. So, apart from their similarity on the visions of Indian nationalism, the BJP, Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS uphold similar social, economic and political outlook. So, you do not find much difference in their programs or policies. The BJP, like its predecessor Bharatiya Janasangh or RSS, believe in the concept of positive secularism, which we have discussed, that reflects equal respect for all religion or religious communities. They are a strong critique of Congress and its secularist stand in Indian politics, and argue that Congress maintained a pseudo secularism or negative secularism to appease minority, and they call their brand of secularism as positive secularism. In fact, Vajpayee as a leader of Bharatiya Janasangh first used this term pseudo secularism. So, they also express similar views on issues like protection of cause, uniform civil code, abrogation of Article 370, which now they have done in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which gave it a special status to fully integrate them in India. At the economic level, however, they began with the ideal of Swadeshi, and they also support the growth of small and cottage industries. However, since 99 onwards, they shifted this strategy to support the new liberal reforms undertaken by the Congress party. So, except this economic policy or shift in the economic policy, there is not much shift from the core philosophy or ideology of the BJP, which is quite similar to the RSS and the Bharatiya Janata Sangh. Of course, the strategy from time to time keeps changing to respond to the changing reality, as we have seen during the time of Vajpayee and Advani leadership in 1980s. Its support for new liberal economic reform is different from its commitment to Swadeshi, and many scholars argue that BJP is in fact a step ahead of Congress in terms of privatization and liberalization of economy. BJP's relationship with the RSS is unique, and that give BJP a unique status among the political parties in India. The RSS not just provide leadership and support base to the party, but also ensure the discipline and the ideological coherence of the party, and therefore, in terms of discipline or commitment among the workers or the cadres of the BJP is highly professional or disciplined, and there is no split in the party and no large scale defection. So, BJP's policies and programs also hardly differ from the ideology of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. However, since the inception of the BJP, there has been different phases of this relationship between BJP and RSS. Immediately after its formation, due to BJP emphasis on the legacy of Janata Party, many RSS functionaries withdraw their support to the party, and this uneasy relationship between the two characterized throughout the prime ministership of Vajpayee. However, this uneasy relationship between the two has improved in recent decades, and RSS and its affiliates have played a significant role in the BJP's victories in 2014 and again in 2019. So, now if we conclude this lecture, we have to acknowledge that BJP has now become a system defining party in Indian politics. So, a system defining party is a party which play a defining role in terms of shaping the debates, agendas, discussion, alignment among different political groups and parties. So, all the political discourse and alignments in the contemporary politics revolves in response to the policies and programs of the BJP. In 2014, after a gap of 25 years, it has achieved a parliamentary majority on its own, which it repeated again in 2019 with increased number of seats, that is 303 in comparison to 282 in 2014. So, in terms of seat share and also in terms of vote share, party has expanded phenomenally and truly become a kind of system defining party. When we have discussed the party system in India, we have seen how this phenomenal rise of the BJP has usured in a new party system or a new phase of party system in India. It is one of the largest party in India in terms of the membership. So, although there has been there have been many phases of BJP rise to position of dominance from its share in terms of both seat and vote share, where in 1984 it had just two seats, or its isolated status among the party where no regional or national parties were willing to align with the BJP, to now in a position of dominance, there have been different phases in the rise and growth of BJP, and for a very long time there has been a tussle within the party between the liberal moderate on the one hand and the hardliner militant Hindutva groups on the other. However, with the only exception of embracing new liberal economic reforms instead of Swadeshi, party has hardly deviated from its core agenda and philosophy. It remains organizationally most disciplined and effective party in Indian politics. Party gives primacy to organization over individual, and that give party and its organization is over many opposition party. So, this primacy of organization and ideology over individual has prevented any defection or indiscipline among its leader and also the follower. So, it has strengthened the party organization over the years. There has been not a single split and no large scale defection from the party as a result of their disciplined nature and giving primacy to organization over individual. Its affiliation with RSS and inheritance of the ideology and strategy of Bharatiya Janata Sangh give the party competitive edge over the opposition party. So, BJP has expanded beyond its core area of north, central and northwestern states in India to other parts through stitching the alliance, and BJP ability to align with regional party and through those alliance expanding its base is something that helped the BJP in expanding its core base from Hindi heartland to other parts of the country. It also represents today the cross sections of Indian society, upper caste Hindus, OBC, Dalits and also Muslims, and it clearly establishes BJP abilities to reinvent itself and change its strategy to changing socio-economic realities in India. Now, with this rise of the BJP, there is two kind of scholarship. One believes that the rise of BJP as some kind of aberration or something that poses serious threat to the democratic, plural or secular nature of Indian polity and society, while the other kind of scholarship argue that there is a kind of centralizing tendency which will pull the BJP towards a centrist party in the long term. So, now these two kind of scholarship has different views or interpretation of the rise of the BJP. However, what would be the actual state of politics or democracy is yet to be seen and perhaps premature to take side either as a threat or as a centralizing party. So, and that is all in today's lecture. We will have one more lecture on the BJP before we conclude. So, the topics that I have covered in this lecture today, you can refer to the book like Joya Hassan, Parties and Party Politics in India. This should also refer to the Constitution and Rules published by Bharatiya Janata Party 2004, and Austin, Dennis and Peter Leon, the Bharatiya Janata Party of India. Similarly, the other texts like Nirja Gopaljan and Pratap Bhanu Mehta has 2 chapters on party system and political parties which you should refer to, and the other text that is mentioned in this slide will help you to understand the formation, leadership, ideology and ideology of the BJP and its relationship with Sangh and Bharatiya Janata Sangh, and you should also refer to the BJP's website to understand more about their policies, programs and philosophy. So, that is all for today's lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Thanks you all.